Okay, you ready?
So,
Gird up thy loins then. We're going to hear from God. And this is the part of the book I said before which I like the best, because we've been listening to all these other guys, Job and his friends, go on and on about his situation and his suffering, which was great. And we can understand his feelings and when he sometimes questions God because of it. But through it all, he did remain faithful. He never cursed God. He never condemned God. He did question him, though, and at times even blame him. So God's been listening to all of that, including all the advice and the accusations from his friends. And now this storm has been approaching while the last guy was speaking, Elihu, and it is now here. And it's God's storm. He is in it. And we're at chapter 38 of the book of Job, which says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who has laid the measures of it? Tell me if you know. Or who has stretched the line upon it?" So God finally answers Job. But he does so with about 77 rhetorical questions, not one of which has anything to do with the sufferings of Job, or the sufferings of anyone else for that matter. So evidently, the purpose of the book of Job, in spite of the opinions of many commentators I've read, that is not the answer. The question as to righteous people suffer. That's not the point of the book. Even though this is the burning theme throughout the entire dialogue between Job and his critics, and a very important question to all of us too, I know. But God never answers it at all in his 4-chapter response. Instead, his questions all have to do with his great creation and man's responsibility thereto. Evidently, that's God's great concern. So he's rebuking Job and all people indirectly not for sinning or for their lack of faith, because we see Job had passed those tests, but instead God seems more disappointed in their inability to understand or answer his questions about his creation. See, Adam and his descendants had been given dominion over the creation. So they were supposed to learn, understand, and care for its creatures and its resources, as we're still charged today. And at this time, more than 2,000 years had passed since then, and little had been accomplished, with even the most righteous of men more concerned about their own affairs than about God's creation. Okay? And his first question goes right to that. In fact, it's, I think, obviously a rebuke to men who try to explain the understanding and origins of all things through their ideas, like evolutionary processes, instead of believing God's supernatural creation as explained to us in his word. And God continues asking, "Where are the foundations fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy. So God's talking to Job about the creation of the earth and about nature, pointing out that Job knows so little about nature. Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? What did I fasten the foundations upon when the morning stars sang together? And concerning the morning stars, we know that the word star oftentimes refers to angels. And you remember in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, when the dragon was cast out of heaven, he took a third of the stars with him, referring to the angels that fell with Satan. The stars of heaven were not made, the stars that we see and the sun and all of them were not made until the fourth day of creation week. Whereas the foundations of the earth had been laid on the third day. Thus, the morning stars were the same as the sons of God, or the angels. And angels are also referred to as the sons of God, as we see in the first chapter of Job. Okay, you remember that. The sons of God were presenting themselves to God, and Satan also came with them. Now, in the New Testament, we are referred to as sons of God. Beloved, now we are the sons of God. It doth not yet appear what we shall be, but we know when he shall appear, we will be like him, for we shall see him as he is. It says in 1 John chapter 3. So Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. Okay, that's a special classification there. And what a glorious scene it must have been when God created the earth and the angels, the morning stars all sang together. That's really something to think about. God goes on, he asks, who shut up the sea with the doors when it broke forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and the thick darkness a swaddling band for it. So again, God's talking about the earth, his creation of it. Who put the bounds for the seas, when I allowed the water to gush forth, as a child out of the womb, he asks. When I made the cloud a garment of the earth, and a thick darkness a swaddling band for it. And I think he's reminding Job of the flood next, when the mighty waters gushed or broke forth from both the fountains of the great deep up out of the earth, and the floodgates of the heavens opened. And God mentions making the cloud a garment of the earth before the rain. Because prior to the flood, there apparently had been no rain and probably no thick clouds then. And I broke it up in my decreed place, he says. I set the bars and the doors and said to the seas, this far you shall come, but no further. And there your proud waves shall be stayed. So we also read that during the flood, great ocean basins were formed, which confined the seas to their present locations. He goes on. Have you commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the day spring to know his place? That it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withheld, and the high arm shall be broken. Have you entered into the springs of the sea? Or have you walked in the search of its depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Now God mentions the springs of the sea. And it's only in recent years that springs have been discovered in the sea bottom, coming up into the oceans. And many such scientific mysteries have been explained in recent years by modern science. I'll point out a few. But many of the questions God asks here are still unanswered today. Going back to verse 2, he asked, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge?" Well, God's rebuking Job there, and his friends like Elihu, who use those very words, for talking about things that they don't know anything about. Have the gates of death been opened to you, he asks. Have you been beyond them? Do you know what is there? Because if you remember, Job was saying, "Oh, I wish that I were dead, where all is silent, where there is no memory, where there is no thought. Oh, I wish I were in the oblivion of death, where man is at rest, where everything is at peace." And God said, "Job, how do you know that? Have you been there? Have the gates of death been opened to you? You're talking about these things, Job, but you don't know anything about them." So these were the things that Job had been saying, but God is rebuking him for saying them. "Have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Tell it if you know it all. Where is the way where the light dwells? As far as the darkness, where is the place thereof?" Where does light dwell? He's asking them. Tell me this, where does the darkness go when you turn on the lights? Well, where does the darkness hide? It's an interesting question. It must go somewhere. Somewhere very close, right? I mean, all we have to do is flip off the lights and it moves right back in. But where is it lurking? I don't know. But God is questioning Job and saying, where is the place where light dwells? Where does darkness dwells? And an interesting discovery of modern physics is that light dwells along a way. It's continually traveling at an immense speed. Darkness, on the other hand, dwells in any place where no light is on its way. God continues, "That you should take it to the bound thereof, that you should know the paths to the house thereof. Do you know it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? Have you entered into the treasures of the snow, or have you seen the treasures of the hail?" Well, as we know now, there are beautiful treasures in every snowflake. If you look under a microscope, you'll see beautiful treasures of intricate, beautiful, perfect geometric designs. And no two of them are alike. How could Job have known that when this book was written? And God's asking him that. And then he asks something else really interesting, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war. By what way is the light parted? How is light divided? God asks. Well, it's another thing that's been recently discovered, that light can be divided. Men have invented a spectroscope that can actually divide light into compartments. So God was speaking about the dividing of light before man ever knew that light could be divided. And God is challenging Job about this thousands of years before it was even known. "Who hath divided the water course for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, or the wilderness where there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and the waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth?" God asked, "Who waters the wilderness, Job, causing the wilderness to bring forth grass and flowers and all? Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? out of whose womb came the ice, and the hoary frost of the heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Out of whose womb came the ice, he asks. Another interesting question having to do with, I think, the worldwide flood and the ensuing ice age. But the book of Job also has more references to snow and ice and cold than any other book of the Bible. Another interesting thing. Can you bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades, he asks, or loose the bands of Orion? Can you bring forth the Mazzaroth in his season, or can you guide Arcturus with his sons? Well, as you may know, the Pleiades is a constellation. It's a little cluster of stars, also known as the Seven Sisters. And God said, can you bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades? Well, it turns out they have great influence. Astronomers now believe that the Pleiades actually is the center of the gravitational forces in our Milky Way galaxy. And God is asking Job, can you bind the sweet influence of the Pleiades? Maybe hinting to what astronomers have discovered, that it actually is the center of the gravitational forces in the Milky Way galaxy, which would hold things together as a solar system rotates around it. Then God asked Job, how would you like the job of guiding Arcturus? Well, it's a star. It's known as the runaway star. It travels at about 125,000 miles per second. And God's asking, how would you like the job of steering that thing around through the sky? It's bigger than our sun. It's going that fast, dodging stars and planets. How would you like to guide that thing? No thanks. Do you know the ordinances of the heaven? Can you set the dominion thereof in the sky? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds, that the abundance of water may cover thee? Can you send lightnings, that they may go and say unto thee, here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or who has given understanding to the heart? Where did you get your knowledge, Job? Where did you get your understanding, he asks. Where does it come from? Who put it there? Who gave you the capacity? Who put your DNA in you? Who created your memory cells? So God is pointing out to Job the marvels of his creative genius, which Job doesn't even know or understand. And David said, in Psalm 139, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. He was sensing something about it. And we see now that we do live in a marvelous universe. Who can number the clouds in wisdom, God asks? Or who can stay the bottles of heaven when the dust grows into hardness and the clods cleave fast together? Will you hunt the prey for the lion, or fill the appetite of the young lions when they couch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provides for the raven his food? Who's overseeing the universe, he asks? Who's taking care of the animals, the ravens? When the young ones are crying unto God, they wander for the lack of meat. When they're in the nest squawking, they're actually crying unto God. In chapter 39, he says, do you know the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? Can you mark when the hinds calve? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Do you know how long their pregnancies are, Job? Or do you know the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring their young ones, and they cast out their sorrows. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow? Or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great? Or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him that he will bring home thy seed and gather it into thy barn? So he's asking, can you tame the unicorn? Can you get it to plow your fields and gather your harvest? And the unicorn is supposedly a mythological creature, right? We think of it as a little fairy horse with a cute little horn that dances around rainbows and stuff. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about a huge, powerful beast. Okay, and other versions of the Bible will often refer to it as an ox. But that doesn't make any sense to me, because an ox is just a cow or a bull. And they can be tamed and trained to plow fields and do other things. But God's asking him, can you do that? Well, he could. He probably had. So that doesn't make any sense. See, the unicorn that's being spoken of here was a different kind of creature. It was a giant extinct rhinoceros, I believe. In fact, there is one found not very long ago, a fossil of one. It's actually called the Siberian unicorn. It's a rhinoceros about the size of an elephant with a big horn. And there have been others like the Elasmotherium, which was even bigger, a big ancient rhinoceros with one horn. So they're referring to that, I think, as the unicorn. It's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 33. They mention the majesty of the unicorn's horn. Like the horn of the unicorns, with them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. And there's some other animals mentioned in this chapter, as well as other parts of the Old Testament, that are of uncertain identity, really. And translators have tried to make them into different modern animals, probably because, like the unicorn and behemoth, they're now extinct, and they couldn't have survived the changing conditions on the planet following the flood, basically is what happened. But most scholars today won't acknowledge the fact that probably some of those animals were still living among men at this time. So God was talking to him about something like that, I think. And he continues, did you paint the beautiful wings on the peacocks, or the feathers of the ostrich? And this dumb ostrich that leaves her eggs in the earth, warms them in the dust, and forgets that a foot might crush them, or that the wild beast might break them in. She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear, because God has deprived her of wisdom. Neither hath he imparted to her understanding. So God's just saying to Job, hey Job, who's done all these things? You know, you think you're so smart. Go ahead and see how far you can get in doing these things. All right? The ostrich, it doesn't know what it's doing. When it lays its eggs, it doesn't care about its young. Someone comes along, steps in the sand, and cracks the egg, because God has hidden wisdom from it. He's just let it be dumb and not care. He's hardened her against her young ones, he says. And yet, you know, with some animals, he's given them very strong motherly instincts. How do you know the difference, he asks. And then God goes on and talks about the horse with its tremendous strength and the excitement of the horse in battle and so forth. Who created this excitement within the horse, he asks him. Verse 26, does the hawk fly by wisdom and stretch forth her wings against the south? Does the eagle mount up at your command and make her nest on high? Who gave the eagle that instinct to build a nest way up on the cliff? Did you order that, buddy? She dwells and abides on the rocks, upon the crags of the rocks, and in the strong place, and from there she seeks her prey, and her eyes behold very far off. Her young ones also suck up blood, and where the slain are, there is she. You notice that the end part here of chapter 38 and then all through 39 where we've been reading, God's questions center on his providential care of his animal creation. He's focusing on. And I think the implication of these questions is that man should have given more attention to the care of these creatures since they've been placed under man's dominion. He's not happy about that. Into chapter 40, where we'll just read the first part. Moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, Shall he that contends with the Almighty instruct him? Job, are you trying to instruct me? He asks. Well, isn't that ridiculous? I mean, can you think of anybody trying to instruct God? Seems foolish, doesn't it? But you know what? You're looking at one of them right here. I think I do that sometimes. God, this is the way I see it. I think you should work things out this way. And when he doesn't listen to me, I get upset sometimes, right? All right, well, that's the dumb part. I seek to instruct God and then get upset when he doesn't follow my wisdom. And he's saying Job does that too. He continues to ask him, Shall he who contends with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproves God, let him answer it. Job answered the Lord. He's going to answer God now. And said, Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? So God said, Hey, look, you've been trying to instruct me, contending with me, trying to tell me how I should do things. All right, answer me, Job. Job says, What can I say? What can I answer, Lord? I'm just vile, trying to instruct you, contending with you, God. Vile means disgusting, means worthless and cowardly. And that's what he's saying about himself. And so there's this brief pause in God's monologue on creation. God rebukes Job, mildly really, for presuming to question his actions when he didn't even understand them. And Job accepts the rebuke and confesses his sin, finishing with, Once I have spoken, but I'm not going to answer twice. But I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind again and said, Gird up your loins like a man. I'm going to demand of thee. Declare unto me, will you also disannul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be righteous? That's a key question there. Think for a moment, because I think quite often we're guilty of this ourselves, condemning God in seeking to make ourselves look righteous. We may say something like Job as, I don't know how God could do that to me. After all, when I'm so good, I'm so pure, I'm so righteous, why would God allow that to happen to me? God isn't fair. He isn't just. He's allowed it to happen to me. Well, don't go there, all right? You may end up hearing some of the same stuff. And God then asks, Have you an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like him? Cast abroad the rage of your wrath, and behold everyone that is proud. Abase him. So God, and this is the last part I'm going to share today. God says, Here, do this now. Go ahead, all right? Deck yourselves with the majesty and excellency. Array yourself with glory and beauty. and cast abroad the rage of the angry person. Behold everyone that is proud on the earth, and abase him, put him down. Look on everyone that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in secret. And then I also will confess to you that your own right hand can save you. So God said, if you can do these things, then I'll confess to you that your right hand can save you, if you can abase every proud person and bring them low. Well, good luck with that. And I'll finish with a quote by commentator Matthew Henry. He said about this, "Those who listen and profit by what they have heard from God shall hear from him more. And those who are not truly convinced of sin need to be more thoroughly convinced and more humble. No doubt God, and he only, has power to humble and bring down proud men. He has wisdom to know when and how to do it, and it is not for us to teach him how to govern the world. Our own hands cannot save us by recommending us to God's grace, much less rescuing us from his justice. And therefore, into his hand we must commit ourselves. The renewal of a believer proceeds in the same way of conviction, humbling, and watchfulness of a believer against remaining sin, as in his first conversion. When convinced of many evils in our conduct, we still need convincing of many more. So we best continue to listen and learn." So, you can all ungird your loins now. Put your girdles back on or whatever until next time, when we'll hear more from God about creation and our lack of understanding thereof. And as E.G. Marshall said in my favorite old radio show, CBS Radio Mystery Theater, until next time, pleasant dreams. Amen.
Shalom.
Shalom to you.